Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Chav Zayin is mostly discussing Isser Hana, when you're using items that are forbidden to get hana from, and you're using them to light a fire, and you use that fire to bake or harden things. What is the status of the objects that you baked and you hardened? Are those forbidden or are those permitted? The Gemara has a machlokes on the subject. The Gemara divides it into two categories. The Gemara is trying to figure out who is it that holds of both categories being forbidden. And the Gemara moves on to another topic which leads us into a discussion of hektish, when there is an Isser Me'ila on hektish objects, when there's no Isser Me'ila on hektish objects. The Gemara then refers back to the Mishnah and gets into the sugya of destroying chametz. What is the proper way to destroy them? An analysis of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, who holds that it has to be burned, and where he gets that opinion from. So first of all, our discussion is about, we have wood that is asar b'hana, and you're using it to fuel a fire. It doesn't have to be wood, anything which you can use to fuel a fire, which is isser hana. And you use it to bake or harden things. So there are two layers to this question. If you use the Isser Hana to fuel a fire that you're using to bake bread, so the question there is, when the bread comes out, does it actually contain Isser Hana within it? It's just bread, it happened to be baked. Do you say that the benefit of the Isser Hana is still in the baked bread, and therefore the bread itself is forbidden? That's machlokes. Rebbe says yes, we do say that, and therefore it is aser. That's our brisa. Then we have another brisa which seems to say not only that, but even if you go a step further, you use the fire fueled with Isser Hana to harden an oven. So there, it's going to be forbidden to eat any bread baked in the oven afterwards. Now there you have an additional step. First of all, you have to say that the benefit of the Hana still hangs around in the oven afterwards, and you also have to say that zeh v'zeh goyrim. You have to say that the bread which is baked later, which involves two batches of wood, it involves the benefit of the batch of wood which hardened the oven, and it involves the benefit of the batch of wood later which baked the cake that you're baking in it, or the bread. So you have two things that go into the creation of that baked bread. Do we say that in a case where one of the things that goes into it, one batch of wood was Isser Hana, but the later batch of wood, the one which is baking the bread in the already Isser oven, that would be Heter Hana? The two things together, do they therefore make the bread Aser? Do we say that when you have Isser and Heter working together to make something that's called Aser, or that's called forbidden? So the Gemara has brought a brisa which says that it is Aser. The Gemara has brought a brisa which says that it is Mutter. We know that there's at least one opinion, the Chachamim, that say that that's not a problem. They even say that it's okay to bake bread. If you bake bread in Isser Hana with Isser Hana wood, the bread itself is permitted, because they hold, not like Rebbe, they hold that the Isser doesn't go into the bread. The question is, who holds both? Who holds both layers? Who holds that the Isser goes into what you're baking? And if you're later going to use a Hana baked with Isser wood, that the oven was hardened with Isser wood, and you can later use that and bake with Heter wood, the bread that'll come out of there will be Isser, because it has to blame part of its existence in a baked state on Isser Hana, which was used to harden the oven. So the Gemara is looking for that opinion. And the Gemara said that it's Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara has brought one example of where Rabbi Eliezer holds that. The Gemara is rejecting it because over there we're referring to yeast, Isser yeast and Heter yeast that you put into a bread. It's not clear that he would say it even if both the Isser and Heter come together. He seems to say that it's only whichever one is last. That's the halacha follows. The Isser is last, then it's fine. If the Isser is last, then it's Aser. If the Heter is last, then it's fine. But here we have both things coming together. We don't know what he would hold, and therefore the Gemara is looking for a new source. The Gemara says we have a brisa, we have a Mishnah quoting a Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer, who only argues on one thing. Therefore, the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer are both of the opinion that this oven would be Aser. Let's see the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if you have Isser Hana wood that's from an Asherah tree, that's a tree that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah, and therefore its branches are Aser B'Hana. If you have that wood and you use it to harden, create an oven, then you have to destroy the oven, because you cannot use it anymore. The oven's forbidden. That's the Tanakama speaking. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't argue on that, and therefore that's a proof. Rashi asks, why do we use Rabbi Eliezer and not the Tanakama? And the answer is because we would like to have a name. Now, if you just used the wood in an oven that was already fully hardened and formed, then you just have to wait for it to cool down. You cannot benefit from that Isser Hana, but it doesn't change the oven. If Asherah branches get mixed into other branches, here's where there's a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer. Tanakama says you cannot use it. It does not become a batal, and therefore it's aser bahana all the branches. Rabbi Eliezer says you take the value of those branches and throw it into the Yam HaMelech. You've destroyed the value, and therefore you don't have to worry about the actual branches of Isser. Now they're in there. You could use them all. The branches themselves are batal, and the value you just can't get benefit from, and therefore you throw the value out. The Tanakhama disagree with that. They say you can't do that. You're still actually using Avodah Zarah wood, so you can't do that. So anyway, so you see here that at least Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you have two things working together, specifically in the case of an oven fired with Isser Hana, then it would be Aser, and therefore he would be the opinion in our previous brisa who holds that way. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Rabbi Eliezer here is talking about Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is a lot stricter. Maybe only in Avodah Zarah does he say that, but in our case of Isser Hana, where we're talking about, let's say, Arla, Kilayim, Chametz, he may not say that. Where it says, well, if you're not going to have it be Rabbi Eliezer, there's nobody else. That's first of all. And second of all, we do have another brisa which explicitly adds on that Rabbi Eliezer says it in all other Yisurim in the Torah as well, and therefore you don't have to worry that he's only saying it in case of Avodah Zarah. Okay, now the Gemara says, so we have Rebbe who holds that the Isser of the fuel definitely goes into the bread. We have Rabbi Eliezer who holds not only that, but he also says that if another batch of wood, which is heter, is involved in baking bread, then the thing is still usher. So the Gemara says, what about a pot? Now, if you were creating plates, cups, and spoons, you couldn't use the plates, cups, and spoons that were created with Isser Hana. That would be clear. If Rebbe holds like Rabbi Eliezer fully, which we don't know what he holds about the Zev V'Zeh Shaila, and if he would hold it away, then we wouldn't have any Shaila. The question is, if Rebbe disagrees, and Rebbe holds that if other wood is involved in the creation, then it's not Usr. What would Rebbe say about making a pot with Isser Hana wood? Later, when you're going to use the pot, it's going to be fueled, the fire under it will be fueled with heter hana. So whatever you're going to cook in it will be a mixture of Isser and heter. Rebbe therefore wouldn't say that that's a problem. The question is, are you allowed to use the pot? Now, as far as the fuel and the Isser hana, you don't have a problem, because like we said, Rebbe holds, we're assuming now, let's say, that Rebbe holds that that's not a problem. The question is, though, as soon as you put food in the pot itself is Isser hana. Rebbe holds that the pot was created with Isser hana, the pot itself is Asr behana. Is the actual placing of food into the pot considered to be a usage of Isser hana? What would Rebbe say in that case specifically? Now, the Gemara doesn't answer that. The Gemara moves on and quotes another version of the brisa that we started with, the brisa that has Rebbe's machlokes with their Rabbanan as to whether bread that's baked with Isser hana is problematic. We had seen that Rebbe says it's Asr. According to Shmuel's version, it's the other way around. Rebbe says that it's Mutter, and the Chachamim say it's Asr. So the Gemara asks, why does he have it backwards? The Gemara says either Shmuel's version, the way he was taught the brisa, was with the opinions flipped, or he was taught it the same way as us, but he flipped it. And why would he do that? Because he held that halacha is like Rebbe, and it's the Chumrah, and he wanted everybody to paskin that way, but he knew that if he taught Rebbe as a Das Yachad, as the sole opinion, people wouldn't go that way. They would go leniently like the Chachamim, and therefore he taught it flipped. Now, we had also seen in our Mishnah that we saw on Daf Chavav, we had seen that the Isser Hana only goes into the bread in a case where you have actual presence of the Isser Hana. If the Isser Hana has already been destroyed by the fire, then it doesn't put any Isser into the bread itself. The case that's discussed is if all you have that's left is coals. There's coals and you bake the bread on coals, then there's nothing left. There's no Isser Hana there. The coals is not considered to be Isser Hana, and it doesn't put any Isser Hana into the bread. So the Gemara says that's only coals that are fully quiet. They're just embers, just glowing embers. As long as they're still flaming slightly, they're whispering, the Gemara calls them, they're still hissing. So then there's still kol Isser Hana there, and that would make the bread Asr. And the Gemara has a machlokes about that. Two opinions, one says it's Asr, one says it's not. The Gemara asks, according to the opinion that says that they're permitted when the coals are whispering, when they're still flaming, so when exactly are coals forbidden? We've seen Rebbe's opinion is that if you bake bread in a fire, so they're forbidden. What exactly is forbidden? You're saying that even flame is not a problem. So the Gemara says Rebbe was talking about where you have an actual large burning fire. If it's flaming coals, he would agree that it's permitted. When you have a large burning fire, then the Isser Hana is still there and it's forbidden. The Gemara says, but hold on a second. But then according to the Rabbanan, who say that even that's not a problem, they argue on Rabbi and they say even that's not a problem because it doesn't aser the bread. So what's the case of wood which is aser bahana? How is wood aser bahana? What exactly are you not allowed to do with it? Everything they seem to hold is mutter. The Gemara says, no, according to Chachamim, aser hana of wood doesn't mean fires. It's nothing to do with fire. It's nothing to do with baking. It's referring to sitting on it, making a chair out of it, or doing something along those lines. A chair or a stool, or anything to rest your feet on. The Gemara now says, what would the Chachamim say in a case where you fired an oven, you created the oven with wood which is hektish? It's also asur b'hana, but not because it's isur na, but because it belongs to hektish. So the Gemara says, there the Chachamim would agree that it's problematic, you can't use the oven, and the bread that you bake in the oven is asur. The Gemara says, why? The Gemara says, very simple. Isser Hana is batal in 200. That means that once the Isser has become insignificant, it's become non-present, it's not a problem anymore. In the bread that you're baking, the Isser is like it's batal, it's not present. However, hektish is never batal, and therefore the hektish, even if it's no longer present in the bread, still the Isser still applies. You have to be able to be mutter when you're non-existent in order for the oven to be able to make bread, which is mutter. So Gemara says that's obvious, and therefore that wasn't the question. The question was, hektish, we know the halacha is that there's a carbon me'ila. If you use hektish, you're not allowed to, you violate an issur called me'ila. You have to bring a carbon and me'ila. Once somebody's chayiv me'ila, the kedusha goes off the hektish. You can't get me'ila twice on the same hektish. Therefore, in this situation where somebody has used the oven, he fired the oven with hektish wood, he already did me'ila. And therefore, that kedusha should all go off, and there should no longer be a possibility of Isser. So when he wants to use that oven later to bake bread, it should be mutter, the kedusha should be gone. So the Gemara says that this is a type of situation where there's no me'ila. There is kedushas hektish, and therefore it's still usher to use, but there's no me'ila, and therefore the kedusha doesn't go off. Now there's two ways there's no me'ila. One is if you use the hektish on purpose. You intentionally use hektish's belongings. There's no carbon me'ila. The Gemara doesn't take that option. The Gemara says similar to that would be if it's something that you consecrated so that you could use its value to buy a carbon shlamim. That's a low-level kedusha, and there's no me'ila on that. There is an isser to use hektish, but there is no carbon me'ila, and therefore that kedusha doesn't go off. Now the Gemara asks here hold on a second, are you so convinced that when you do me'ila, you use it, then the kedusha goes off? It's not entirely true. We have a mission that says that if you use that the ashes of hektish are still forbidden to use. They're still an isser. There's still me'ila there. Now, even though it's used already and it's burned, and the isser should go off, there's still the ashes are usser. The Gemara says wood of Asherah's ashes are also usser, and hektish is usser forever. So the Gemara answers that case where the ashes are usher. That's talking about where it was without me'ila. The usage of it was not me'ila. It was they just got caught fire on their own. But there's no me'ila that happened over there. And the Gemara gives a second answer, or it could be that those ashes are referring to special ashes that are involved in Trumas Hadeshen, a special mitzvah that the ashes have kedusha, and there's an avodah to do with it. And it says, it's Xeris HaKasa that says you have to put them in a certain spot and not spread them out. There the kedusha stays. But other than that, once the thing is turned to ash, it would not have kedusha any longer. That ends this entire discussion. The Gemara now quotes again from our Mishnah, where we had seen that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that the only acceptable way of destroying a chametz is by burning it. The Gemara wants to know what his source is. The Gemara will bring a kal v'chomer, ask on the kal v'chomer, and then bring the same limud but as a mamatzinu, not as a kal v'chomer, and the Gemara will have to narrow down the things that could be included in order to save the mamatzinu, because we keep finding examples that mess it up. So first of all, Rabbi Yehuda's source, the Gemara says, is from noiser. Noiser is meat of karbanos that are left over after the time that they were supposed to be eaten. It's forbidden to eat them, and they have to be burned. So says Rabbi Yehuda, noiser, there is no isser to have the meat. There is no isser bal yirah bal yamot. It's not forbidden for it to be in your property, and the only way to get rid of it is burning it. So chametz, which is forbidden to have in your property, certainly the only way to get rid of it would be burning it, kal v'chomer. The Gemara says the problem with your kal v'chomer is that it brings a kula, it brings a lenient halacha, that if you have chametz and you don't have possibility of making a fire, you don't have to destroy it, because there is no other way of destroying it. You can't tell me kal v'chomer that chametz is more chomer than noser, and then end up in a situation where you're giving it a lenient halacha. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda didn't mean an actual kal v'chomer. He just meant the mamatzinu. Learn from noser, just like noser is forbidden to eat, and you got to burn it. Chametz is just forbidden to eat. You have to burn it. The Gemara says, well, how could that be? Look at nevela. Nevela is forbidden to eat. You don't have to burn it. The Gemara says, no. Chametz is more like noser because chametz and a noser are both aser b'hana. Nevela is not aser b'hana. The Gemara says, well, look at Sharon Iskal, an ox which killed somebody which has to be stoned, and it is aser b'hana, and it is forbidden to eat. And yet, Sharon Iskal doesn't have to be burned, so why should you learn from noser that chametz has to be burned? So the Gemara says, no, chametz is more similar to noser than Sharon Iskal is. Noser is aser b'achila, aser b'hana, and if you do eat any of it, you get kares. Chametz is like that too, aser b'achila, aser b'hana, and kares. Sharon Iskal doesn't have that. The Gemara says, well, I have another thing. I have the chaylev fats of a Sharon Iskal. Chaylev is kares. And because it's Sharon Iskal, it's aser b'hana. So it's aser b'achila, aser b'hana, it's kares, and there's no mitzvah to burn the chaylev of a Sharon Iskal. So the Gemara leaves this as a problem, and the Gemara goes to a new source, which we shall pick up on.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.